Story 2. The Unseen Laborers. Daily Life of Scribes in Medieval Monasteries. Section 1. The Monastic Dawn and the Call of the Quill. Imagine, if you will, waking before the first sliver of dawn, not to the clamor of a city street or the gentle rustle of a quiet farm, but to the sonorous peal of a bell echoing through cold stone corridors. This was the unchanging rhythm of life within a medieval monastery, a self-contained world dedicated to prayer, contemplation, and, crucially for our story, the preservation of knowledge. For centuries, long before the printing press revolutionized the dissemination of information, these isolated outposts of devotion were the quiet engines of intellectual survival. And at their heart resided a particular kind of laborer, the scribe. You might picture a scribe as an ethereal figure, hunched over illuminated manuscripts, his work bathed in a mystical glow. The reality, however, was far more prosaic, infinitely more tedious, and often physically grueling. This was not a glamorous life, but one defined by discipline, repetition, and an unwavering commitment to the written word, however boring the text might seem. Their daily existence, governed by the rigid Benedictine rule, was a carefully orchestrated sequence of prayers, manual labor, and, for many, the painstaking work of copying. Let us step into this world, perhaps in a monastery nestled in the verdant valleys of Anglo-Saxon England or amidst the rugged mountains of Lombardy in the 9th or 10th century. The air would be damp and chill, particularly in the depths of winter. The only light might be the weak, flickering flame of a candle or a small, carefully guarded lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls. The silence, broken only by the rustle of robes, the soft scratch of a quill, or the distant murmur of chanting from the chapel, would have been profound. This was the environment of the scriptorium, the beating heart of the monastery's intellectual life. A scribe's day began early, often long before sunrise, with the first monastic office, matins, followed by lauds. These hours of communal prayer were integral, setting the spiritual tone for the day. But once the sacred rituals were concluded, the more earthly duties began. For those assigned to the scriptorium, this meant heading to their appointed workspace. These were rarely grand, purpose-built rooms as we might imagine today. Often, the scriptorium was simply a section of a cloister, a large, well-lit by medieval standards chamber, or even individual carrels, small enclosed wooden desks in a shared space, designed to maximize what precious natural light was available. The equipment was deceptively simple but required significant preparation. The most fundamental tool was the parchment, or sometimes vellum, the writing surface itself. This was not paper, which would only become widely available in Europe much later. Parchment was meticulously prepared animal skin, usually from sheep, goats, or calves. The process of turning rawhide into a smooth, durable writing surface was an arduous, smelly, and highly skilled task, often undertaken by specialized lay artisans or by monks themselves. Imagine the immense effort, soaking hides in lime baths for days to remove hair, scraping off flesh and fat, stretching them taut on frames, and then meticulously scraping them thin with curved knives. Each sheet had to be flawlessly smooth, free of imperfections, and ready to absorb ink without bleeding. The quality of the parchment directly impacted the final beauty and longevity of the manuscript. A single large book could require dozens, if not hundreds, of animal skins, representing a significant investment of time and resources. Next came the ink. This too was not bought pre-made in a bottle. Monastic inks were often concocted from gall, nuts, rich in tannic acid, mixed with iron sulfate, gum arabic as a binder, and water. The resulting black or dark brown liquid was surprisingly durable, biting into the parchment. For red ink, often used for rubrics, headings, or instructions. From the Latin rubret for red or initial letters, vermilion or lead oxide was used. Creating these inks involved grinding pigments, mixing, and careful testing, another labor-intensive process that fell to the monastic community. Then, the quill, typically made from a goose feather, though swan, crow, or even eagle feathers could be used. Each quill had to be carefully prepared, hardened by heat treatment, then meticulously cut and trimmed with a small knife to create a perfectly sharp, flexible point. The angle of the cut determined the thickness of the line, and a scribe might carry several quills, each optimized for different tasks or levels of detail. The constant resharpening of quills would have been a repetitive, almost meditative act throughout the day. With these tools prepared, the scribe's true work began. Before any copying could take place, the parchment had to be prepared for the text. This involved ruling the pages, drawing faint lines, often with a stylus or a lead point, to guide the scribe in maintaining straight margins and consistent line spacing. This was not a task to be rushed. Uneven lines would mar the aesthetic and readability of the final product. Imagine meticulously ruling hundreds of pages, perfectly aligned, day after day, without the aid of modern measuring tools. Then came the actual transcription. A master copy, often chained to a desk to prevent theft, would be placed before the scribe. The work was slow, painstaking, and often required intense concentration, especially if the original text was faded, damaged, or written in an unfamiliar script. Errors were a constant threat. A misplaced letter, a skipped line, or a missed word could alter the meaning of a sacred text or an important legal document, potentially for centuries. The silent pressure to be accurate would have weighed heavily. You would find the scribes working in a disciplined silence, broken only by the ambient sounds of the monastery, perhaps the distant clang of the smithy, the murmur of monks in prayer, or the gentle lapping of water from a nearby fountain in the cloister garth. This was not a place for idle chatter or distraction. Each stroke of the quill, each dip into the inkwell, was a deliberate act. Their posture, often hunched over their desks, would have been uncomfortable, leading to back pain, eye strain, and cramped hands, the occupational hazards of their seemingly sedentary profession. Their diet, governed by monastic rules, was typically simple and often meager: bread, porridge, vegetables from the monastic garden, and perhaps a small amount of fish or cheese. Meat was a rarity. This Spartan fare, combined with the often cold environment and long hours of sedentary work, meant their lives were not of physical comfort, but of intellectual and spiritual pursuit. Yet through this very austerity, they found a different kind of richness. The texts they copied were not always lofty theological treatises or classical literature. While Bibles, liturgical books, and patristic writings were central, scribes also copied chronicles, legal documents, land charters, medical texts, herbals, and even practical handbooks on agriculture or building. Each manuscript, regardless of its content, was treated with immense reverence, for it represented preserved knowledge, a link to the past, and a gift to the future. This meticulous, slow process meant that producing a single large book could take months, or even years, for a single scribe. A grand Bible might be the work of an entire lifetime for a dedicated monastic community. It was a project that spanned seasons, perhaps even generations, a testament to long-term dedication that is almost unimaginable in our fast-paced world. These unseen laborers, hunched over their desks, were the very backbone of medieval intellectual life. But what motivated them to endure such repetitive, physically demanding work in conditions that we would consider harsh? Was it purely spiritual, devotion, or was there more to the life of a monastic scribe than just endless copying? And what challenges, beyond the mere act of transcription, did they face in their quiet? Section 2. Monotony, Mastery, and the monk's meticulous eye having set the scene of the cold, silent scriptorium and the basic tools of the scribe's trade. Let us now delve deeper into the day-to-day existence and the myriad challenges that shaped these unseen laborers. The life of a monastic scribe was not merely about the physical act of putting quill to parchment. It was an intricate dance between discipline, patience, intellectual engagement, and often profound physical discomfort. You must remember the overarching context. Monasticism for a monk. Every activity, including copying manuscripts, was an act of devotion, a form of prayer. The ora et labora, pray and work dictum of Saint Benedict governed their entire existence. Thus, the tedious, repetitive nature of the scribe's work was transformed from a chore into a spiritual exercise, a humble offering to God and a service to the community, both present and future. The sheer monotony, which might drive a modern individual to distraction, was embraced as a path to humility and spiritual focus. Yet, even with such spiritual motivation, the practical difficulties were immense. Imagine working for hours, perhaps from matins before dawn until vespers in the late afternoon, in a space that rarely rose above chilling temperatures. Medieval monasteries were not designed for comfort. Stone walls retained the cold, and heating was minimal, often limited to a central hearth in a communal room. Far from the individual carols, you would find scribes enduring numb fingers and aching joints, their breath misting in the frigid air. Maintaining a steady, elegant hand under such conditions was a testament to extraordinary discipline. Eye strain was another constant companion. The flickering light of a candle or a small window provided insufficient illumination for intricate work. Copying small, dense script for hours on end, day after day, year after year, inevitably took its toll on their vision. Many scribes would have suffered from worsening eyesight as they aged, their later works perhaps betraying a slightly less precise hand. This was a slow sacrifice, offered willingly to the pursuit of knowledge. Beyond the physical discomfort, there was the intellectual challenge. While some scribes were merely transcribers, copying texts without necessarily understanding their deeper meaning, others were highly educated individuals. They might be involved in collation, comparing multiple versions of a text to identify errors or discrepancies, a task requiring sharp critical thinking and an encyclopedic knowledge of theological or classical literature. They might also be responsible for correction, meticulously scraping away errors with a sharp knife, the origin of the phrase clean slate, and rewriting the correct words. This was a delicate operation. Too much scraping could damage the parchment, rendering the sheet unusable. Then there was the art of illumination. Not all scribes were illuminators, but in many monasteries, particularly those renowned for their artistic output, The roles often overlapped. Illumination involved decorating the manuscript with intricate designs, vibrant colors, and miniature scenes. This was a distinct and highly specialized skill, demanding artistic talent, a keen eye for detail, and immense patience. The pigments used for these vibrant colors were often derived from precious minerals, lapis lazuli for blues, gold leaf for shimmering highlights, making the illuminator's work particularly valuable and adding significantly to the cost of the finished manuscript. Imagine grinding tiny fragments of precious stone into fine powders, mixing them with binders, and then applying them with the utmost precision, often with brushes made from fine animal hairs. This was not mere decoration. It was an integral part of the manuscript's beauty and a visual aid to understanding. Turning a text into a work of art. The hierarchy within the scriptorium would have been subtle but present. There might be a scriptor or armorius librarian who oversaw the work, assigning tasks, acquiring materials, and perhaps even checking for errors. Under him would be the more experienced scribes, proficient in various hand scripts, and then the novices or less skilled monks, perhaps assigned to simpler tasks or to the laborious work of ruling parchment. You might see a younger monk, struggling with his quill, looking enviously at the elegant hand of a master scribe, knowing that years of diligent practice lay ahead. The daily schedule, while seemingly monotonous, also offered moments of communal life, regular meals in the refectory, where a designated reader would often read aloud from a religious text, provided a brief respite from the silence of the scriptorium. There might be periods for manual labor in the monastic gardens or workshops, ensuring the self-sufficiency of the community. These breaks, though brief, would have offered a change of scenery and a chance to stretch cramped limbs, before returning to the desk. Beyond the monastery walls, the scribe's work had profound implications for the wider world. In an age of widespread illiteracy, where books were incredibly rare and valuable, monasteries served as the primary custodians of knowledge. Without their painstaking efforts, much of classical literature, philosophical thought, and even basic historical records would have been lost to the ravages of time, war, and neglect. They were the human hard drives, meticulously copying and recopying data, ensuring its survival across generations. You can imagine the quiet pride a scribe might have felt upon completing a particularly challenging manuscript, a sense of accomplishment, not for personal glory, but for the glory of God and the benefit of future generations. Each finished book was a triumph over entropy, a victory for civilization against the forces of forgetting. This enduring sense of purpose likely fueled their perseverance through the cold, the monotony, and the aching hands. Yet, despite their crucial role, scribes often remain nameless, their individual efforts subsumed into the larger monastic enterprise. Only occasionally do Colophon's short notes at the end of a manuscript reveal a scribe's name, a date, or even a personal plea, perhaps for a warm cloak or a good drink to ease their toil. These rare glimpses remind us of the individual, humans behind the monumental work, but even with their spiritual devotion and immense dedication, these monks were still human. What happened when errors inevitably crept into their meticulous work? How did they manage the sheer volume of tasks required to produce such magnificent works? And what was the true significance of this quiet, unseen labor in shaping the very intellectual landscape of medieval Europe? Section 3. The Enduring Script and the Dawn of a New Age. Explored the demanding daily life and the meticulous work of the monastic scribe, witnessing their dedication to prayer and painstaking copying in the cold, silent scriptoria. Now, let us consider the culmination of their efforts, the inevitable imperfections that crept into their work, and the profound legacy they left behind before a new technology rendered their singular role largely obsolete. Despite their unwavering discipline and spiritual motivations, scribes were, of course, human. Errors were an unavoidable reality of their meticulous craft. You can imagine the dread that would wash over a scribe upon realizing a line had been skipped, a word misspelled, or worse, a theological concept fundamentally misinterpreted. These were not mere typos. In an age when books were rare and authority was often derived from the written word, a textual error could propagate through countless subsequent copies, distorting history, altering doctrine, or simply introducing confusion for centuries to come. The methods for correction varied. For minor slips, a scribe might simply erase the offending word with a knife, carefully scraping away the thin layer of ink and parchment, then rewriting the correction. This required immense skill to avoid damaging the delicate surface. For larger errors, a word or phrase might be crossed out and rewritten in the margin, with a symbol indicating its correct placement. Sometimes, a later scribe, comparing the text to another manuscript, would make their own corrections, adding notes or emendations to the margins, creating a layered history of textual transmission and correction within a single book. These, often quirky and personal, offer rare glimpses into the individual human hand behind the seemingly impersonal process of copying. A scribe might curse the cold, complain about a stiff neck, or even express boredom with the text they were copying. These fleeting personal touches remind you that these were not automatons, but individuals embedded in their arduous tasks. The sheer volume of work often necessitated a collaborative effort within the larger monasteries. While some books might be copied by a single scribe, especially smaller ones or personal copies, major undertakings like large Bibles or complete classical works would be divided among several monks. One might be responsible for the main text, another for the initial letter's rubrication, and a third, the illuminator, for the intricate artwork. This division of labor, a kind of medieval assembly line, allowed for the production of truly magnificent volumes, each a testament to communal dedication and specialized skill. You can envision the hum of activity, subtle though it was, as different stages of a manuscript's creation progressed, simultaneously in different corners of the scriptorium. As centuries passed, the centers of learning began to shift, while what remained important. The rise of universities from the 12th century onwards created a new demand for books, particularly textbooks for students. This led to the emergence of commercial scriptoria in towns and cities, where professional scribes, often lay people, copied texts for profit. These scriptoria operated on a different economic model, often employing more rapid methods, sometimes even using petya systems, where texts were divided into sections, rented out to multiple scribes for simultaneous copying, then reassembled. This was a direct response to the burgeoning demand for knowledge outside the cloister, a subtle sign of the world speeding up. Yet, the monastic scriptoria continued their work, often focusing on theological texts, liturgical books, and preserving the more ancient and sacred works within their own traditions. They were the steadfast guardians of spiritual heritage. Even as the intellectual landscape broadened, the true climax in the story of the monastic scribe, however, arrived with the invention of the printing press with movable type in the mid-5th century by Johannes Gutenberg. This was not a gradual shift, but a technological earthquake. Imagine the profound impact. A single printing press, operated by a handful of people, could produce hundreds, even thousands, of identical copies of a book in the time it would take a single scribe to produce one. The painstaking months-long labor of an individual monk was suddenly rendered obsolete in terms of mass production. For the monastic scribes, this revolutionary invention marked the slow decline of their core function. While some monasteries initially viewed printing with suspicion, as an unholy machine or a threat to traditional artistry, others embraced it. Many monastic libraries became early patrons of printing presses, acquiring printed books to expand their collections. Monks themselves eventually learned the new craft, shifting from copying by hand to setting type. The scriptorium, as a place of ceaseless manual transcription, gradually faded. The scratch of the quill was replaced by the clatter of the press. This wasn't an immediate end, of course. For decades, both scribes and printers coexisted. Printed books were initially designed to imitate manuscripts, right down to leaving spaces for hand-drawn initial letters and a loop. But the trajectory was clear. The monastic scribe, the patient, unseen laborer who had safeguarded civilization's written heritage for over 1,000 years, was slowly ceding his central role to a machine. The legacy of these unseen laborers, however, is immense and utterly invaluable. They were the human bridges that carried knowledge from antiquity through the so-called Dark Ages and into the Renaissance. Without their relentless dedication, often performed in harsh conditions and with little personal recognition, much of the classical world's wisdom, and indeed the very foundations of Western thought, would have been lost forever. They preserved not only religious texts but also philosophy, history, medicine, and scientific treatises that might otherwise have vanished into the mists of time. You can reflect on this remarkable resilience and foresight. In an era where literacy was rare, and physical books were unimaginably precious, these monks understood, deeply and intuitively, the profound power of the written word. They dedicated their lives to ensuring its survival, not knowing what future generations would make of it. Their work was an act of faith, not just in God, but in the enduring value of knowledge itself. In our own hyperconnected digital age, where information proliferates at an unimaginable rate, the story of the monastic scribe serves as a powerful reminder. It underscores the fragility of information and the constant, often unglamorous effort required for its preservation. While our scribes today are software engineers, data archivists, and cybersecurity experts, their fundamental mission remains the same: to ensure that the accumulated knowledge of humanity endures, safe from decay, loss, or digital oblivion. The quiet patience of the medieval monk, painstakingly forming each letter, still echoed